Welcome to Taking Stock. I'm Amanda Lang. Coming up on the show, improving how we build houses in Canada could help the whole economy. And a crisis in healthcare of our own making. Plus, how we feel about money dictates what we do. That's all ahead. First, for the week that was in business, it's time for the briefs. Canada managed to find growth in third quarter, once again avoiding a recession. Economists had warned that forecasts for 0.5 percentage point GDP growth might be overly optimistic. The economy has proved to be surprisingly resilient, but faces major headwinds thanks to continued trade tension with the United States. Still, the central bank is calling for growth of 1% annualized in fourth quarter. Much will depend on the strength of retail sales in the final months of the year. Alberta and the federal government have the broad outlines of an energy deal, including support for a pipeline to the coast of BC. The agreement will include commitment on industrial carbon pricing, which in turn paves the way for a removal of the federal oil and gas sector emissions cap. BC is objecting to a new pipeline. Canada has agreed to restart talks with India for a trade pact after relations between the two countries soured in recent years. The agreement came on the sidelines of the G20 meeting in South Africa. Negotiations around trade were suspended in 2023 after Canada accused India of being complicit in the assassination of a Canadian citizen. Global oil prices could fall into the $30 range in the next couple of years, according to JP Morgan. The bank says rising output from countries, including the U.S., would send supply higher in the near term and prices down. The bank thinks prices will settle back to the mid-50s by 2027. Total debt held by Canadians rose more than 4% in third quarter to $2.6 trillion, according to TransUnion, with balances rising in all categories. Mortgages rose 4.1%, while non-mortgage debt rose 4.3%. Lower interest rates drove many consumers to refinance their mortgages or renew early. That sent mortgage originations up 18% in the quarter. And those are your business briefs. Building more homes is a clear goal in Canada, but doing that in a way that improves rather than worsens our productivity is equally as important. Iowerth is Deputy Chief Economist at CMHC. Iowerth, great to have you with us.
Good to be with you.
So great work. I mean, CMHC has identified the housing need, and now you're saying there is a way to do this more efficiently. What's on the list of things we need to be looking at to not just build homes, but build them in a better way?
It's an all-hands-on-deck effort. We need everybody across the board. We've been talking a long time about policy changes at the municipal and other regulations. We need to continue to do that, but we also need to get the building sector to be more efficient, more productive. And we don't mean cutting jobs. What we mean is working smarter, working better management techniques, more digitization, more efficiency, new tools, more skills. We need all of this because housing affordability is such a critical issue for Canadians.
And you've identified some things on the technology side that would make the process of building more efficient. Is there a role for government to play there in helping businesses invest in that new technology and new processes?
These new technologies, they usually involve a fair amount of risk, and I think it's up to the government to help mitigate those risks and even to encourage and mandate perhaps even some of these technologies. We need to get the private sector to step up and innovate, but I think it's important for the government to recognize the risks that the private sector is taking and promote and incentivize that risk-taking. Can we mandate, for example, as other countries have done, that social and affordable housing projects require more digitization, that there's experimentation to lower costs? There's all sorts of opportunities here, and it's a critically important issue.
One of the things we seem to have missed the mark on, Ellett, is the types of homes that have been built. We have a lot of small condos. We don't have as many rental units or single-family homes. Could we use some of your ideas around getting more productive and efficient in building and also get the mix better? I imagine that a multi-family unit is actually more efficient to build than a single-family home.
Yes, and we hear in other countries that 3-4 bedroom apartments are very common now. I think there's a challenge in Canada because we also hear in Canada that those are expensive to build, perhaps because of the regulations. So yes, we need larger units, But we also need, if you build a large structure on one side of the road, one of those large multi-unit structures that you mentioned, we can also build the same thing on the other side of the road. So we got these economies of scale. There's too much customization in housing, and we need to move to mass production.
Only 30 seconds here, but the federal government has a plan, Build Canada Homes. Are you a fan of it? Do you think it will achieve its goal?
I think it's important because it is tackling a key priority, which is more housing for low-income households. It is concentrating on social and affordable housing and getting those built more cost-effectively. But given that market housing is 95% of the Canadian housing system, we need those technologies, those innovations, those productivity improvements across the board, all of market housing.
Oh, it's so good to have you for this. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Iowerth is Deputy Chief Economist at CMHC. Coming up, healthcare costs continue to dominate spending in Canada. So how do we do better? Stay with us. Welcome back. Healthcare is one of the biggest line items in government spending. Here's a look by the numbers. The total spend on healthcare in Canada was $372 billion last year, or $9,054 per Canadian. That's 12.4% of Canada's GDP and the highest ever. But age matters. Canadians younger than 50 use $3,000 of healthcare a year. By our early 70s, that rises to $10,000 a year. And by the age of 90, we cost the system $37,000 a year. Meanwhile, demographics means the taxpayers supporting healthcare is shrinking from 7 working-age Canadians per senior in the mid-1970s to just 3 today. That's led to pent-up pressure on the system and moves by provinces to address it. Quebec's Bill 2 ties 10% of doctor pay to performance metrics, and in Alberta would allow for a dual system where doctors could switch between a public and a private one. Those moves have had an immediate reaction, including reports of 200 applications by Quebec doctors to relocate to Ontario, and a survey of doctors by the Canadian Medical Association that showed while 43% of Canadian doctors don't feel trusted or respected by government in general, that number jumps to 76% in Alberta today and 80% in Quebec. Doctors are worried about the future effects too. 80% think recruitment will suffer under plans like these, and 66% worry that quality of care will actually decline. Margot Burnell is president of the Canadian Medical Association, and she joins us now. Thanks for being with us, Margot. Well, let's start with the CMA's view of these recent moves in Alberta and Quebec. What does the CMA think about it?
Well, CMA's view is that we're very disappointed. Governments are making decisions about us without us. So that will affect the outcome of patient care. So patients and physicians need to be consulted on some of these very major changes that are being imposed by governments.
Is this the right place to find savings, doctors?
With respect to Quebec, they have come out saying that it's really to increase access to care. I haven't seen that they've commented on the costing of that. The provisions within Bill 2 are increasing roster numbers without increasing resources. So you're going to affect quality of care, trying to increase quantity of care. So that's one example with respect to Bill 2. The other example is with respect to when negotiations fail, there is a lack of the government agreeing to arbitration, which has been agreed to by every other province across the country.
Margot, access to a family doctor has been a concern in Canada. So what kind of progress has been made?
A recent report that will be issued by Our Care out of Toronto suggests that we will have made some progress over their last report a couple of years ago. We are starting to improve access to care. It's a slow process, but we know those solutions, and those solutions are team-based care, whereby when a patient visits their primary care provider, physician, nurse practitioner, if they need to see those individuals for a major new diagnosis, great. But if they're having trouble finding housing or having coverage for their drugs, then they may see a social worker who's associated with that practice. So increase increasing team-based care is critically important. Decreasing administrative burden so that physicians have more time to spend with their patients and their families will be critically important.
What about removing the barriers for doctors and nurses to move between provinces and also for international workers to get accreditation here?
So a couple of points with that. When Bill C-5 was legislated, it did not talk about healthcare professionals, physicians, but we have been working very hard with our many stakeholders to look at multi-jurisdictional licensure. So we've talked to ministers of health, we've talked to premiers, we've convened meetings with the Medical Council of Canada, we've convened meetings with the federal medical regulators, all with the hopes of increasing doctors with respect to their ability to practice. So it doesn't increase net number of doctors, but it allows them to practice where borders, provincial borders abut. So Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, Ontario, Quebec. It allows consultations from the northern part of our country to more tertiary centers in the southern part of our country. It allows our trainees and our residents to go and look at other practice sites and to obtain new techniques to see where they want to practice in the future. So that's the first. We've also advocated with respect to making the transition for physicians that want to immigrate to our country, and have worked and discussed this with the Minister of Health and the Minister of Immigration. And we've also advocated for internationally trained physicians who are within our country to be able to have their credentials assessed and to offer practice-ready assessments to enable them to practice safely at the scope of their practice.
Thanks so much for being with us today, Margot.
Thank you.
Margot Brunel is president of the Canadian Medical Association. Well, one thing is clear, the cost of the healthcare system falls disproportionately on younger Canadians, but there is a way to start addressing that. Paul Kershaw is the founder of Generation Squeeze. Paul, thanks for being with us.
Great to be with you. So
you've done some work, not just as we just saw, quantifying what this looks like, but also on how to change it. So let's start right there. What should we start doing so that we don't actually bequeath the next generations this unfair burden?
Well, we need our provincial and federal governments to come together and establish what we call a better late than never task force. We knew that the cost of population aging was going to drive billions and billions in additional costs for medical care. We knew it at the same time that we were revising premiums for the Canada Pension Plan in mid-1990s. Back then, we increased the CPP premiums by 68%, so that when boomers retire, we wouldn't make the CPP plan go bankrupt. There'd be a pool of money to draw down. Provinces needed to do the same thing to raise revenue for medical care, but didn't, and now everyone's paying the price. And so the opportunity now is for us to have this better late than never task force. I wish we'd done it 30 years ago. Let's do it now, because the ongoing success of universal access to medical care is going to depend on our leaders having a conversation with financially secure boomers to make them aware that governments in the past kind of failed to prepare adequately for their medical care needs. And they either leave those for their grandchildren, or we ask those who are financially secure to figure out how they contribute more to sustaining medical care access for their generation and for those to follow.
And, Paul, of course, one way we do that is, as you say, ask people who can afford it to contribute more or take less, however you want to look at that. There's a bit of a third rail in this country around privatizing any part of our healthcare system. And we've heard some of that debate here. How do we sell this as, well, actually, if you can't afford it, it's a form of taxation, really, but it's some equity in terms of what you're taking out of the system?
Yeah. So, I mean, on other times I've been on your show talking about the need to modernize OAS. And I think it's actually safe to go to a financially secure retiree, say someone with $180,000 of household income, and say, I think it's fair for us to ask you to take a smaller amount of old age security subsidy so that those dollars can be repurposed for other national priorities. I don't feel the same way saying to that, that retired couple who has, six-figure income saying, please take less medical care.
Right.
So it's going to be a harder conversation. In this case, case, we're going to need to talk about that generation contributing more revenue right now. And if we want to protect universal access, it's going to have to be a conversation about taxation. I know that's kind of anathema in Canada, and our politicians regularly run on platforms and say, we're going to cut your taxes and offer you more. But that is happening disproportionately for medical care at the provincial level. And our study shows that it is driving the deficits. Like in Ontario alone, the cost of boomers' medical care today is $22 billion more than it would have been had we had the same age distributions when boomers were young. That drives the Ontario budget from a $15 billion deficit to what would otherwise have been an $8 billion surplus. And that is coming on top of the fact that younger Canadians are already contributing 20 to 40% more of their income taxes towards healthy retirements for boomers than boomers paid back in the day. I don't think most Canadians realize that. Most boomers haven't been socialized to that fact. And I don't know financially secure boomers who want to leave a lousy legacy for their kids and grandchildren. That's a group of people who thought they'd been sacrificing all their lives for their kids and grandchildren. But public policy has been asking their kids to sacrifice. And now we need to reverse that.
So good to have you, Paul. Appreciate your time today.
My pleasure. Have a great day.
Paul Kershaw is the founder of Generation Squeeze. Coming up, Canadians may be too preoccupied with paying the bills to save for their future. That's still ahead. But first, a prestigious U.S. school is moving from Chicago to Montreal. The Siebel Institute of Technology has operated since 1868. It's a brewing school. It says Trump administration changes have made it less hospitable for international students who attend the school in person. So up to Montreal it goes. It helps that the institute was bought by a Canadian company 25 years ago. Let's hope it's just the first shot at using U.S. policy to brew up opportunity in Canada. We're back after this. Welcome back. A recent survey from Meridian found that half of Canadians have some shame around past monetary decisions, and almost two-thirds are too focused on day-to-day expenses to even think about long-term goals. Dilys de Cruz is VP of Retail and Wealth at Meridian. Thanks for being with us.
Great to be here, Amanda.
So I want to start with that last point because we talk a lot about affordability. We know that people are worried. The jobs numbers have been a little bit mushy and causing concern for folks. What does it suggest when people are overly focused on day to day? They're not planning for the future. Are we just setting ourselves up for a huge problem down the road?
Yeah, it was interesting. Our research showed that, so here's the good news on the research. 86% of people are tracking their finances, but out of that, 64% are feeling stressed about their finances. And to your point, with the economy and the job market the way it is, obviously there's an anxiety. And so with that stress, what we found is that it's taking a huge emotional toll on Canadians. And so when we look at money, we really need to look deeper. And we found in the survey is to uncover why are people feeling stressed. And there's a lot of shame and anxiety. Mm-hmm. And I think it was 2/3 in that survey said if they could do a reset, they would do a reset. And so this is why we went deeper, and we'll talk a bit more about what Meridian's doing about that, but really looking at the emotional side of money versus just the tool side of money and budgeting.
Yeah, which is so important because, of course, we know there's a ton of emotion around money. Let's talk about that shame for a minute. People are worried about things they've done in the past. We do know people are ashamed when they get into trouble. In other words, if they're deep into debt, they don't ask for help because they feel more shame than they should, and they don't get the help they need. How can we manage through that? What's the right message around the emotions we feel?
Yeah, I think it's really important. What we're trying to get at here is, there's a lot of tools, and Meridian has a lot of insights to help people with their budgeting if they're in trouble. We also have the ability to offer people self-service plans. But those are the tool side, and people need to take a step back and go, let's look at the emotional side. What is triggering the shame? What is causing us what has caused us to get into that problem? And really kind of pause to understand the behavior so that you don't do it again. I kind of liken it to when you're dieting. What are the triggers that make you eat that chocolate, or what are the triggers that make you overeat? And it's really about pausing to understand what are the triggers that are making me continually maybe exhibit the same behaviors. And so I think that's the first step. But to your point on shame, I think that I want people to know they're not alone. People, it is tough out there, and everybody at some point in time will reflect back and go, I made some bad choices, or I'm really shameful about what I did. And it's really about just understanding that that and almost not judging yourself and saying, okay, how can I move forward? How can I go deeper? And what help do I need to move forward?
Is it getting worse, Dilys? I mean, I have an instinct that it is, because we're, of course, now trapped in our algorithms that actually encourage us to consume even more. Are we getting less healthy about this?
Yeah, I think we are. And listen, I had up retail banking and wealth management, and I'm just as bad. When right now it's Black Friday week, and on Amazon, and you're online shopping, and there's this urgency and impulsiveness to, oh, I need that, and it's really about to your point on algorithms too, it's getting more and more catered to what we want specifically. And so it's really important, again, to understand our triggers and put a pause in, have some behaviors that will put a pause in to help you not really act on that urge or that trigger that is making you want to spend that money. But I do agree with you right now. Even more importantly, it's important to pause and to understand those triggers. Thanks so much for being with us, Dilys. Appreciate your time. Thanks again. Dilys DeCruz is VP of Retail and Wealth at Meridian.
Time now for the takeaway and free trade in name only. An agreement to drop trade barriers between provinces and territories was met with celebration, and rightly so, since those barriers have long been identified as a costly own goal that hampers growth in this country. Since interprovincial trade accounts for about a fifth of Canada's GDP, it's not something to ignore, so action is good. But a closer look at the agreement reminds us that calling something free trade and actually implementing free trade are not the same thing. This agreement covers thousands of products but stops short of two key areas, food and alcohol, that are hot-button provincial ones. The thing about internal trade barriers is that they usually exist for very human and very local reasons. Protecting local farmers has a long and proud tradition in Canada, and that includes grape farmers. That protection often comes in the form of keeping their products from truly competing. The idea that it's still hard to buy BC wine in Ontario or even right next door in Alberta is sort of amazing in the context of this free trade talk. But carving out these two areas works politically. It's why the other big areas of trade friction, including and maybe especially around professional accreditation, could face an uphill battle. In that case, jobs are theoretically being protected, even though in many instances the sectors in question, like healthcare, face huge worker shortages. It's still an easy concession for a government to grant to a union when negotiating a new contract. Easy to write and then costly and complicated to undo. Whether it's how we accredit a psychologist or how we deem food is safe to eat, we can standardize across this country. If you hear concerns about a rush to degrade our standards, there's a good chance it's coming from a vested interest in the status quo of protected sectors and industries. My takeaway? It's great to see any progress on freeing up trade across Canada, but let's keep in mind that it only lives up to its billing if it's actually free. That's Taking Stock for this week. I'm Amanda Lang. Thanks for being with us.